Joining us in this media briefing. With me is my colleagues from National Treasury and the Presidential Climate Commission, and we're going to be taking questions regarding the symposium in terms of its objectives. As you have known, the theme says moving the needle on climate change and transition and the role of National Treasury. Thank you. And now I'm going to hand over to the panel. So how are we going to go? I'm going to take questions in a set of 3, and then afterwards we'll then close the briefing. Thank you. Can I check if there are any colleagues that have any questions that you would want, since we're coming from the plenary? And maybe I'll leave it to the panel, maybe to just emphasize key points that are important for us for the symposium. Thanks. Deepak?
Oh, I go first. I'm Deepak Patel, Head of Climate Finance and Innovation at the Presidential Climate Commission. For us, this partnership with National Treasury, as well as the World Bank, and the presence of the Department of Forestry, Fishery and Environment is critical to ensuring that all of the hard work that we've done individually and collectively, public and private, and in the area of stakeholders, comes together with coherence in terms of understanding, as the President has pointed out, what the key climate response challenges are and how we work in unison, in lockstep and in alignment towards meeting not only our decarbonization objectives, but to ensure that ours is a climate response that is accompanied by the just transition. We can go into elements of detail around the just transition, but we need to emphasize that ours is a country-specific set of pathways that we have together forged as a plan to ensure that our climate response is accompanied by economic development. I want to just spend a minute. I don't usually respond to ways in which the media interprets what this is about, but there has been suggestion in one media at least that this conference and in fact the Presidential Climate Commission's launch of a just transition finance mechanism is as a result of, let's just say, dissatisfaction with the way in which our jet investment plan has been arrived at and is progressing. Not true. The Just Transition Financing Mechanism, which will be launched at an event this evening, speaks very specifically to the socio-economic and justice elements of the transition. It does not speak at all to the need to mobilize, scale up, and appropriately fashion finances towards the larger mitigation, adaptation, and resilience projects. It is very specific to ensure that we find ways and means of financing socioeconomic alternative development plans at the local level. It is very specific to finding ways, creative ways, in which to mobilize the finances that are needed for community support, community involvement in all aspects of our transition, and it is meant to harmonize all of our efforts, public and private, to ensure that no one gets left behind in the transition.
Thank you, Deepak. Can I take an opportunity to call in National Treasury, represented by Ms. Makhoshi?
Thank you, Cleo. I'll be very short. Deepak has covered most of the issues. So I think for us, the objective of this symposium really is around improving government coordination on climate change. And what the president has said, not leaving anyone behind. There are a number of initiatives which the Treasury is engaged with. We are bringing together the scientists, we're bringing together our development partners who you heard speak this morning, and other government departments, and all obviously led through the presidential, guided through the Presidential Climate Commission to do this work. The ultimate objective really is to move towards developing a green growth strategy, incorporating that into our framework going forward. And also looking at what, from a fiscal framework perspective, we can do to support climate change. We're very much keen to ensure that whatever financing that the Treasury provides also contributes to the just component of the just energy transition. And those are communities that live in areas where most of this transition has to happen in Mpumalanga, for example, where most communities are affected. So really that is what we are aiming to do, and in collaboration with our colleagues across government to ensure that this objective is owned by all of government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Makhoshi. Can I now take this opportunity to get questions so that we have an interactive session? I recognize you. Please give me your name and the organization you're representing. Thank you.
Sure, it's Rema Shaka from Daily Maverick. I have a question about the funding mechanism that will be decided on during the MTBPS. Can you give us a general idea on what kind of funding mechanisms have been put on the table so far? Are we talking about loans, concessional loans, grants, guarantees? What would be the ideal split among those funding mechanisms that have been discussed so far? So a general picture on the kind of options that are on the table. Thanks.
Okay. Who's going to take that opportunity? Whilst our colleagues are putting their thoughts together, Ray, to your question, can I give the opportunity to DFFF colleague to make some input?
Well, thank you. Just from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment perspective, many of you would know that last year, early this year, in the previous administration, we worked very hard to finalize the climate change bill. So the priority going into the 7th administration would be around implementation of that particular climate change act. And the act, as we mentioned this morning, calls for a greater coordination. And in this regard, we are happy to be sharing this platform with our colleagues from National Treasury and the Presidential Climate Commission. The key focus would be around the issues of implementation. And I'm sure many of you have seen several media statements from Minister Dion George that we will be participating constructively in fast-tracking the implementation of the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, which is part and parcel of implementation of this act. However, as you heard from the President in the morning, there are also issues of building resilience. So there will be particular focus on implementation of the Climate Change National Adaptation Strategy, which is already underway. But with the Act coming into place, that would then allow us to work closely with the district municipalities and local government and putting in place the plans that they need to do so that we can all be resilient. Of course, as we've mentioned before, the key focus when you are working in a cooperative manner is also providing sufficient and timely information, and this is where our agency, which is the South African Weather Service, will come into force. So we will continue to play that particular role. So implementation is going to be the key word, but that does not mean that we'll take the foot off the pedal when it comes to international collaboration. South Africa is a responsible global citizen, so we'll continue to play our part, but with a particular focus of assisting in the resource mobilization for our own implementation. But we can only do as much. Climate change requires everyone to be involved, which is why we will continue to play that particular role so that we can push not only ourselves to close in the implementation gap, but everybody else. It is only in that manner that will stay safe if everyone else play their part. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kekan, on that. Can I get the response to Ray's question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. My name is Edgar Sishi. I am the head of the budget office at the Treasury. So with respect to how things might look in the MTBPS, I think the context in that regard is important. As you know, and as mentioned, including in the President's speech, we have an intergovernmental fiscal system. If you look at plans, particularly as it relates to capital investments over the next 3 years, they're dominated by state-owned enterprises and public entities on the one hand, and municipalities, particularly the big cities on the other hand. And if you split the same numbers up by sectors, you see that it's energy and water, as well as transport and logistics, that dominate. The reason I'm saying this is that what this means for us is, of course, at the time of the budget, we provided a broad outline, an outline which we will update at the time of the MTBPS. And the manner of the update is going to include, if you take a look at entities, for example, as well as state-owned enterprises, where the key is about their investment plans and how those investment plans are financed. We are processing a number of applications for things like guarantees, including, for example, for foreign currency borrowing. So that update will provide in terms of the numbers and what that looks like at the time of the MTBPS. But those applications are critical for the mobilization of financing that they will use to make investments in line with their corporate plans, the state-owned enterprises and public entities. With respect to municipalities, as you know, municipalities are provided funding through a multiplicity of ways. They have borrowing powers, they get grants from the national government, and they raise their own revenue. And we've got work going on at the moment across all three areas. If you look at what happened in KZN and eThekwini in particular with the floods in 2022, I mean, a big part of the problem we had there was not having sufficient plans and execution of plans around adaptation and resilience. So you didn't have very basic things done, stormwater drains cleared and so on and so forth. So what then needs to happen in that context, as well as in other cities around the country, is you need stronger revenue mobilization locally. You need the grant system that we run as the National Treasury to be more focused and to have tighter conditions. And finally, you also need stronger balance sheets so that those municipalities can go into the market and mobilize financing for the purposes of those investments. And we're doing work across all three of those elements. So what you'll see in MTBPS, you'll see, for our part, an update of our own borrowing plan. We tabled a borrowing plan in February that includes a foreign borrowing of around $2 billion US. So we're going to provide an update on where we are in that regard. And finally, we're also going to provide an update on any additional guarantees or any additional borrowing limits that we may have granted to state-owned enterprises and public entities. Thanks.
Thanks, Edgar. I'm now going to take the last round of questions. There was a colleague in front here. 1, 2. Yes, you may start. Please introduce yourself and the company you're representing.
Thank you so much. My name is Tinashe Mpasiri. I'm from INI Africa Media. And just looking at this symposium in itself, one key aspect of it is ensuring access, particularly for individuals, to energy so that they're able to also do many other things that can propel them to secure the kind of life that they want. So looking at that aspect alone, and more importantly, the element of reduction of carbon emissions in the atmosphere, and then also ensuring that there's more oxygen that can be produced to minimize this climate change issue. Are there any partnerships, any collaborations that to ensure this just transition delivers on its promise? Are there any partnerships with any countries, institutions that have also, found solutions, such as, for example, the Tai Reed Energy in Hungary, which significantly works in remote areas in as far as reducing carbon emissions and providing energy? What sort of partnerships are they that they've been signed, and where we are collaborating with other countries to provide solutions?
Thank you. Is that the...
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you so much. Can I take my colleague at the back and the one next to you? Cool.
Hi, thanks. It's Deneen Erasmus from Business Day. This is a question for the Treasury. There were some comments this morning on how the ramping up of the carbon tax in South Africa will enable government to spend more on climate action. I was just wondering, I'm just looking for a figure of, and I know we are busy ramping up the tax, but in the previous fiscal year, is there a rough figure of how much the carbon tax contributed to the fiscus, and is there a view or a projection on, as it's ramped up over the next few years, roughly how much Treasury expects to earn for the fiscus from the carbon tax?
Thank you. Can I get the last question in this session? And then we'll allow the panel to respond.
Hi, this is Zamali Tuli from AFP. My question is around the initial funding that was promised by France, the EU, the US, the 8.5 billion. I just wanted to know, has all of that funding essentially landed on South African shores, or are the grants and loans still being rolled out in phases? And if the funding has not come into the possession of South Africa, what are some of the hindrances that are making for that to happen? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are live streaming the event, so I've got a question that comes from News 24. Once all your questions have been responded to, we'll then respond to that one. Thanks.
So a set of questions from online, as well as related to the last question that was asked, and then I'll also cover quickly the question related to energy access, energy security, and forms of ownership, I'm assuming, is implied in that question. Is the PCC's proposal for a fundraising body supported by Treasury? Where will the JTFM be located? I tried to speak to this in my earlier remarks. National Treasury, through the National DG, responded to our JTFM in a very positive light. We need to understand that the JT funding mechanism is an evolving concept. It is not a one-off fund that is being proposed. It is proposed as bringing together all the capabilities that sit within the ecosystem, both public and private, to ensure that they firstly get aligned to each other, and secondly, provide the support for the much needed projects which the commercial sector find difficult to fund, either because they are small in scale or their returns inherent in those projects are suboptimal for their own private sector commercial return needs. And therefore, we're seeing this as very specific, as I said, to ensuring that those smaller community projects, those alternative economic transition plans, particularly in the negatively impacted areas of the country, namely in Mpumalanga, perhaps also in the Eastern Cape, where the motor manufacturing sector has a set of risks playing out as a result of, for example, the carbon border adjustment mechanisms. With respect to National Treasury's role, I think the National Treasury colleagues have indicated that through the MTBPS, as well as through ensuring that some of the grants that flow, either as part of the $8.5 billion package or through the public resources where those are available, these will be harmonized with other sources of capital. As it relates as well to mainstreaming climate response, I think the National Treasury colleagues have acknowledged that in the JTFM recommendations that talk about climate budget tagging, that talk about a potential fiscal review through a green development and industrial policy lens will also be undertaken. I think we all accept that the National Treasury's ability to provide fiscal resources is constrained, and therefore we need to become much more creative in the application and use of those limited budgetary funding mechanisms to ensure that they either de-risk or they allow an environment to be created where the private sector can come in. Many funders want to support Eskom's transmission plans. I think there has been much in the public domain, including announcements by the Minister of Electricity and Energy that the transmission grid needs to be looked at from the point of view of the National Transmission Company being empowered to look at creative ways in which to find financing from the private sector without ownership being transferred. And this is currently being looked at. And we as the PCC understand that part of the JET investment plan talks about a largely, but not solely, private sector-driven pipeline of projects in the renewable sector. Last point I want to make relates to energy access and security, raised by the colleague in the front. And here the PCC is advocating for socially owned renewable energy projects, particularly but not confined to the rural and peri-urban areas. We're also, in some of the work that we're doing with municipalities, encouraging municipalities to find ways of further enhancing the private sector investment in rooftop solar, to also begin to look at creative options in the informal settlements. And the President has been on record as saying, we envisage a future where hopefully every single household will have a rooftop solar capability in the future. But we are actively looking at models to ensure that we have mixed, blended financing options where communities and workers can begin to become not only owners but beneficiaries of renewable energy projects as they get rolled out.
Maybe just to answer the question around the pledges, you'll recall that the total pledge that was made to support just energy transition is $8.5 billion. And just covering 2023 and 2022 and 23, we have raised $2.4 billion. $2.4 billion. We are currently engaging with the partners to raise further funding from the JET package, and we anticipate that funding for 2024 will also be in the 2.3, 2.4 billion mark. And this excludes funding from other partners that we are talking to, including the UK, for example, who have made a pledge for a guarantee facility of close to 2 billion pounds, and also, as you heard from the American ambassador this morning, their pledge was part of the 8.5 billion, but it's mainly targeted at private sector investments. Thanks.
Thank you. Edgar?
Yeah, there was a question around the carbon tax. Obviously, we provide details on the taxation numbers in Annexure C of the budget review. So I would refer you to those very lengthy tables that will keep you up at night, I'm sure, and occupy you with all the information that you need. I mean, we've always said that, look, the revenue from the carbon tax is not a lot. I mean, it's less than 2 billion rands. This was last year, so that's a fairly small amount of money. And the core issue there is, the main purpose, of course, is to provide an incentive. It's, we don't think of it as being a way in which we can somehow raise huge amounts of money in the short term. As we go along, of course, the Act mandates amendments to the rates and the levy, which we implement and announced them, of course, in February. And we will continue to do that. And of course, on that basis, the revenue will increase. But we're not expecting it to increase in such a way that it becomes, I guess, for lack of a better description, a sort of a cash cow. It's more about the incentives in respect of carbon neutrality over time. And that's the objective. Thanks.
Thank you, Edgar. Can I check if all the questions have been responded to satisfactorily? I'm not seeing any more hands. I would like now to come to a closure of the session. Allow me to thank the panel for an engaging input, and the media briefing is closed, and thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks.
One announcement is that the 5:30 cocktail for the launch of the Just Transition Framework report is open to the media, and it's taking place in the same building. Thank you.